All right, guys, we're going to get going. First and foremost, I would like to thank Chad. Where's Chad? He's somewhere on here. Without Chad's introduction, I would not know, or likely would not know our guest today. So I'm super grateful for the introduction and that initial call that I had with Dr. Spencer was off the charts. I'm like, oh my God, this is my kind of guy. So we're excited. This is called Conversations with. It's our Legends series, and we're very excited for today. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I just give you the format for those of you who have not been on before. The way that we do these is we do about a half an hour of Dr. Spencer and I chatting, and then we open it up to our community. And that's kind of the cool part is you don't really ask your questions through chat. You ask your questions directly to Dr. Spencer and get them answered. So if you do have a question, all you have to do is put in the chat that you've got a question, and then Kathy will feed that to me, and I will call on you, and you can ask your question directly to the good doctor. Let's go over real quickly what we've got coming up. So on December 21st, we have Avram Miller. Avram is a legend from the Valley, worked with Steve Jobs, worked with Bill Gates early on, worked with Andy Grove at Intel, and he started Intel Capital. So we're going to talk about his book, which is called The Flight of the Wild Duck. And he is the wild duck. Andy Grove, who's was the legendary CEO of Intel, said that every company needed a wild duck, and Avram Miller was that for him. So we're going to be talking to another legend on December 21st. On January 11th, we have Megan Riley, who I think is on the call somewhere. Megan came on the scene on Shark Tank when they pitched to the Sharks and got a deal from Mark Cuban, and since then has grown an unbelievable business called Tippy Toes with her sister. And so we've got Megan on January 11th. On January 25th, we have Kat Gazarian. Kat is the CEO of Game Day HR. And you may remember that she was the moderator for Mark Brown from the New York Jets and Jack Driscoll from the Eagles when they came on and spoke to us. And then on February 8th, we finally finalized this date with Antonia Hawk. Antonia is the head of the Ritz-Carlton Leadership Center. And she's an absolutely remarkable person. So we're excited for our next guests and hope everybody can join us. One other thing before we start, we sent out a survey. So Robert Hamilton Owens, who I often call the most interesting man in the world, certainly makes the Dos Equis guy look like a schlub. He is offered to do a long-term master class, so multiple classes for our community, so that we can help fund his expedition to the North Pole Marathon. So I don't know many 70-year-olds who are running marathons, period, nevertheless running a marathon in the North Pole, but that's what Robert's got up his sleeve, and we want to help support him. If you did not fill out the survey, please do, and Kathy will be sending that survey out again for any of you who haven't seen it. But it essentially was just, if you did want to participate in that type of in-depth masterclass with a true legend, what are the topics that you'd like to go over? So without any further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Jeff Spencer. And I've been saying this kind of all week in the lead up to this. It's just wow. When you look at Dr. Spencer, He's an Olympian. He's a world-renowned artist. He is a multiple-time author, and he's a coach and advisor to everybody from U2 to Richard Branson, Tiger Woods, Lance Armstrong, and I think about 40 Olympians. That is just insane. In addition, he's a phenomenal father, and he's a great friend. So I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Jeff Spencer to us. Thanks for joining us from California. Great to have you on.
Well, thank you, Scott, and a big thank you to Chad for the very generous and kind chance for us to meet. Thank you, Chad.
Awesome. So take us back. You're 11 years old, and you said, I'm going to be an Olympian. And then you've had this amazing life, which I just condensed. World-renowned artist. Your art has been featured in some of the best galleries in the world. You've written multiple books. And who in the world coaches people like Tiger Woods, U2, Richard Branson, Lance Armstrong, etc.? Kind of take us back to 11-year-old Dr. Spencer and that journey, which has produced just an epic life.
Well, thanks. The genesis of this, when I was 7, I thought it'd be cool to be an Olympian. That's all I thought about. I was a very physical kid. I loved to run, jump, and throw. But I did it just to explore the possibility of what was in front of me. I never did it to showcase myself. I never did it to prove to others I could do what they told me I could. And that was never my motivation. And I had the good fortune of having 3 angels in my life. The first angel was my cycling coach. And the last time I saw my dad, when I was 13, he invited me to train with this training group. And he was a 3-time Olympian, 5-time national champion. And he said to me, I want you to train with my group because I want you to be around the Olympic level conversation now. I don't want you to evolve over the next 5 or 10 years and then join the conversation. It's too late. I want you to be exposed to this right now. And what it did, it awoke something within me that was already there. He didn't put anything into me. It was already there by genetics or constitution. And he said, the most important thing that I can do for you is I can teach you how to win, because winning is a learned skill. You're not born with it. It's a learned skill that when it's applied, then you can pretty much get to wherever you have aspirations to get to. And I owe everything to him, from taking me from the kid that had ambitions to become an Olympian to becoming an Olympian, 10 years later. The second angel that I met when I was 18 and he was 76, and he was a Shakespearean actor. He was a playwright, a poet, metallurgist, university trained. He was a war correspondent in World War I, and he developed an entirely new type of art glass sculptor. And he chose me to be his apprentice. I was an athlete, but he chose me to be his apprentice. And where that came into it is that when I was helping him create his masterpieces, I had a creative side to me that I wasn't aware of, but he cultivated and drew that out of me. But probably more importantly, during our breaks and at lunchtime, he would play classical music to me. He would read the poets. He would read the great philosophers of history to me. And he said, I need to fill you up on this stuff. And I had the capacity to be able to absorb that. And so that, combined with what I learned from the art of winning as a learned skill, and then probably the soul side of the angel was a man that helped me become an Olympian, actually. But there was a dignity about him with his French accent that I was captivated by, that I wanted to emulate. And I didn't understand how a person could show up with such immaculate attention to detail and have such a generous heart. And then I learned that he was in a Nazi concentration camp for 6 years during a war, exposed to every human cruelty conceivable, but yet it drew the best out of him. And he was a man of extraordinary graciousness. And so with those 3 people, they gave me multiple sides to myself that my parents, that were non-entities, couldn't craft out of me. So I was very fortunate to have that. And then between my sophomore and junior year, when I was at USC on an academic scholarship studying sports science, I went on to, that's when I was an Olympian. Then I went on to get my master's degree in sports science. So there was 2 things I had there. It's like I knew how to win because I had the secret formula. I'd done it for over 10 years. I had the experience of being an Olympian, and it's like you can't coach people in the rarefied air of the 1 or 2% that makes the difference at those levels. It has to be part of your DNA. You can't study people, you can't read about it and be it. It's not possible. And I certainly had that within myself. And when I got my master's degree in sports science, because of my knowledge of winning and my knowledge of how to craft a body that could push and how to craft a body that could stay in the game long enough to develop the assets necessary to become a perennial achiever and to amass a memorable legacy. Athletes came to me and they wanted to win gold medals, and business people came to me because they wanted to become their own champions. So whether it's boardroom or locker room, the strategies and the cultivation and growth of the individual, how they think, what they do, how they show up, how they plan, how they avoid potential problems, how they seize best opportunities. That was a natural thing for me. And I always had that since I was a young kid. So what happened is that people recognize that you don't need 10 experts in your life that aren't talking to each other, and you can't possibly do all their recommendations because there's not enough time in the day to do that. I had all those assets. I had the ability to meet them where they were. I had the ability to know how much of what needed to be there to create the synergy that's necessary to create and make exponential the normal rather than the occasional exception. And so that's what introduced me to working with the people at a very high level. And at the top, it's a bit incestuous where everybody talks to everybody else. Nobody looks at Instagram. Nobody goes to Facebook. Nobody cares about your website. They're asking each other, who do you know that I can trust that understands me? And they realize, well, in Jeff can do it all because he's done it all, And also one other thing I want to add here is that with the athletes, they wanted to extend their careers by minimizing injury risk and having speedy recoveries if they did get injured. And the business people that I was advising to become their own champions came to me and said, look, I don't want to be like my same age counterpart where everybody's dying from heart attacks in their early 40s. I want to avoid that. How do I do that? So I went back to school and became a primary healthcare provider as a chiropractor, specializing in wellness care and in acute trauma. So that opened up another panoramic side to me where I knew how to win. I knew how to craft plans to get into the winner's circle consistently and predictably. I knew how to foster and cultivate a body that could push and survive and have a long-term runway to amass the greatest number of magnitudes of personal successes. And I also knew how to manage health, because one of the greatest risks is that people try to push too hard too fast, and the risk of blowing themselves up is really high. And if you blow yourself up and don't cross the finish line, then you don't win. So that's how I got into the rarefied air between, the U2s and the Bransons and the Lances, et cetera. The common thread was they had their hands on the steering wheel. The technical sides of their disciplines were something that we could find a technical expert to answer, but to weave the tapestry together to make sure that we were properly paced and we had the champion's mind to be able to do what had to go right when it had to go right, and we were prepared for those 3 to 5 days that make or break a career every year, and we converted those into personal successes and professional successes. Was really how I found myself getting into the rarefied air of the people that I currently work with.
Amazing. If you want to read a great story, Dr. Spencer wrote about John Burton, who he had mentioned as one of his angels.
He was
in Standing Out Tribute, and it's a beautiful tribute to the impact that John made on his life.
The best.
Tell me a little bit about working with everybody from U2 to Richard Branson to Lance Armstrong, and even yourself as such a high achiever. What's the common denominator between, a star athlete, a front man for an iconic rock band, and an iconic business person? Is there a common thread?
Yes, and that's that they think smart and they get the best people around them to make sure they get the inputs necessary so that they don't fool themselves or trust in their blind spots to reveal to them what the current context is and their state of readiness to engage whatever the next set of actions needs to be. They always size things up. They look at the reality of what it is. They decide on what to do based upon that input. And most people don't do that. It's very classic to see people think that just because they believe it, that that's what it really is. And you can lose, a couple of decades of hard work by taking action on an assumption that appears to be true just because you think it. But if it's not it, then it's still not it. So you want to compress the timeline by limiting the preventable problems and being able to seize the best opportunities that allow you to proceed ahead at zone pacing, where you're not exposing yourself to a personal, it's very common in the early 40s to see people have a catastrophic health event or a catastrophic relation failure or a financial ruin that can extinguish a couple of decades of hard effort. And what's tragic about that is that most of that is completely preventable. It's just that there's not enough foresight to be able to read what's coming early enough, or interpreting the experience that reveals the things that should be considered rather than the presumptive things that we think to be true. You want to avoid that at all costs, in my opinion. And that's what they do very well. They listen, they seek out the best people. They're fearless about implementing the right things that have to go right at the right time. They know that there's 3 to 5 days a year that will make or break their year. And they prepare for that. They play a really good offense against it, but it's not reckless. It's very responsible.
If you had to give advice on maybe a couple things that people could do right now at a tactical level to set themselves up for success, whatever success means, personally, in business, in athletics, what would some of those things be?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and this would be sort of a broad brushstroke, but the real secret to this is to have as fewest number of moving parts as possible. The human mind thinks, well, the more detailed we are, the better it is. But generally, the more detailed it is, the more risk that things can go wrong, and you have preventable stalls. So I think, trimming the things out of your life that don't need to be there, that aren't contributing to you as a whole, both personally and professionally. And it's also extremely important to make sure that your relationships are solid to be able to proceed ahead. I always feel that, my job is to help people win big guilt-free without wasting time and effort and without blowing themselves up, and to be mindful about the time and effort that you're putting into self-care. Because if we blow ourselves up prematurely, and that zone of doom is between 40 and 60, that's
Yep.
where the cumulative strain of deferring things until later. It's always, well, I promise when I get there, things are going to be different. The promise to the relationship and the promise to health practices. I'll get there once I arrive at the promised land, which is right around the corner. And that's, you have to manage self in process, because what's important is that once we learn the process and we're confident in our ability to succeed, if we have a long runway in front of us, then we can amass the best life of passion, purpose, productivity, and also prosperity. So I think a lot of this is personal management.
Yep.
You don't want to defer that to later. Blow yourself up, then everybody loses.
When you talk about pruning things out of your life that aren't serving you, the first thing that comes to my mind is the number one culprit binging Netflix?
Well, it could be, but I think the number one deal is trying to chase too many things simultaneously, fearing that if you don't do everything, you're going to get left behind. And that's not true at all. It's taking inventory of the things that really matter. I mean, the truth is that at least in my perspective here, is if there's one or two prime movers at any moment in time that will move the ball the most, that everything else is dependent upon. And if we're taking action on that, it's a bit of a meandering journey. But the reality is that our plans that we make are about our assumptions about the context later. And until we get to later, we don't know the reality. So there needs to be an inherent flexibility that allows us to adjust and adapt as we go. And once we realize that, then we become a lot more compassionate, with ourselves, and we don't put a sense of urgency into us that could make us prematurely do things that we believe to be in our best interest, but end up being counterproductive. I see that a lot.
Interesting. What if you had to look back, and I'm sure this is tough to come up with one thing, but is there a piece of advice that you got at some point that was kind of a seminal moment for you?
Well, a couple things I'll say to that. Yeah, well, my mentor that you mentioned, who chose me to be his apprentice, that allowed me to develop my artistic skill to show my art in the best galleries in New York City. I owe everything to him. But I was feeling sorry for myself one day, and because I come from a welfare family, and he said, "Would you like a helping hand?" I said, "Yeah." I mean, it's like, how did he know? And so I was trying to figure out, well, how do I gracefully, accept that very generous offer? I said, "Yeah, man, if there's ever a day that I need a helping hand, it's today. Yeah, I'd love one." And he looked at me with these steely blue eyes, and he said, "Well, if you want a helping hand, you got one at the end of each arm." And he turned around and he walked out of the room. And so I kind of sort of sat there like, wow, what was that all about? But I started to stand up just a little bit straighter. And I realized how much he loved me, because this was a pivotal life moment where he was not going to interfere with my having to figure this out for myself, and then develop the belief in myself that I had what it took to find my way out of anything. Yep. And that was one of the most loving experiences I ever had in my life. And I, again, eternally grateful to him for that. And then the other one from a practical perspective is I was talking with Lance, prior to one of the Tour de France's, and I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Almost too good." And that's what I want to hear, because what that means is that he's too good too early. He needs to pull back, and he needs to show restraint. And restraint is the most important word in the prolific achiever's vocabulary, because too much push too often is not sustainable. And when we're ahead of the game, then it wants to inspire us to push more, to try to get to more faster, because we believe that if we don't get to that, well, we have the wind at our back, that we won't have a maximum set of rewards or successes. And that's absolutely not true. There are absolutely times where when you push to a certain point, you must stop and pull back to carry momentum, but replenish team, replenish resources. And sometimes that's at the very point where your human nature tells you that you got to go for more. Yep. And I see that that's an inflection point that is like human catnip. It's almost so difficult to resist. But yet, if the team isn't rested, then they're not going to trust us as a leader. They're going to think that we're just there to support their ambitions. And so we lose the allegiance capital of them believing in us to follow us indefinitely into the future. And so what Lance said there, I think, is a really important thing that we need to be mindful of, because if we blow the team up, then we're constantly looking for new people. We all know the frustration, what that's like. We want to be a benevolent leader that's trustworthy as a human, that people can believe in, that we can take them from where they are to where they want to get to, that they can't do themselves. So again, it's the concept of restraint, the most important word in a prolific achiever's vocabulary.
Interesting, very interesting. So, it made me think of this time of year. A lot of people start to reflect and they start to think about their goals for next year. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the, proverbial New Year's resolutions and where people go wrong and what they should be doing at these pivotal moments where I think, the collective mindset is to think about, what can I do better in 2022?
Well, I think that's correct. I think we also need to do a couple things here. Is that at this time of the year, I think it's really important that we finish the year strong and we set ourselves up to hit the pavement running on 1/1/22. We don't defer it to later to do the things that we could do now to be better prepared to start the new year, rather than coming back and trying to decide at that time. I feel that as far as aspirations go, I think that they need to be appropriate in reach. And they also, having a variety of different aspirations is important as well. Like, in my opinion, I feel that just for example, someone came to me and said, "Look, you were at this event that I produced. What do you think about it?" And I said, "Well, it's as good as it can get." He said, "Yeah, I really slammed it and knocked it out of the park, didn't I?" I said, "Yeah, it was a grand slam." And then he declared to me, "Well, because I did the grand slam, I'm going to 10X it next year. What do you think about that?" I said, "I think it's the stupidest thing I ever heard of," because it's like, if you grand slam it, people aren't expecting you to grand slam it next time. So you don't need to do a grand slam to prove your value and your worth to other people. You've already demonstrated it. And the risk of, 10xing it or 2xing it next time is remote. And people aren't looking to that. If you come back and it's only 5% better, you're informing them that your success wasn't a fluke, it's for real. Now they start to trust you. And because they trust you and it's 5% better, that's the place that you want to be at, because people will pay in a line for reliability and trustworthiness. So I think, again, we need to be mindful about what our unique context is and how do he took my advice, by the way, and crushed it. And from then on out, he's been a perennial superstar in his industry. So I think we need to really look at where we are and what that means and what's realistic and why are we proposing to do what we're proposing to do. Does it make sense to do that in terms of the overall context of where we are, how we're being viewed by others, what we think our reach really is? I think those are the key things that we need to look at in formulating our goals for the coming year.
Love it. Love it. We're going to go to Q&A because I know we've got people lining up and chomping at the bit to ask you questions. So I think we're first going to Pennsylvania to Tyler. So Tyler, you're up with the good doctor.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much. And Dr. Spencer, it's truly a pleasure to meet you. As many know on the call, I'm a podcast host, and I've had the honor of interviewing so many incredible people over the course of my show. And one of the really interesting things that I found over my 100+ interviews was actually around the habits of highly successful professionals, and ultimately really trying to distill down some of these habits into actionable items that listeners could implement immediately in their job. So being an Olympian yourself, a world-class artist, and having worked with Richard Branson, Chris Voss, you mentioned that there's some things about thinking smart and compressing timeline that I thought was really well. And I'd be interested to hear, are there any common daily habits between all of these world-class professionals that you believe that everyone should try to start immediately implementing in their daily routines to help with some of that success?
Well, I think it's really looking at the day taken as a whole. And the way that I do it with my clients is that everything that we do prior to the workday starting is what I call preparation. There's a strategy that we do to prepare to step onto the field. You should always warm yourself up before you step on the field. Otherwise, you can get injured. It's the same way in life. There are some preparatory things that we need to do to step onto the field ready to play the game. And then once we've gone through a day of high productivity, then there's a recovery side to it. And your recovery has to match your output so that you can show up day in and day out and perform at your best. So I think we need to be mindful that if we can't control our day, which is the fundamental unit of life, then we can't control our life. And we can't get the trust from other people to follow us indefinitely into the future. So that's one thing that I would certainly suggest that we make sure that we do. And there's a couple of important rituals in the morning that I suggest that we do to set ourselves up to step onto the field to make the first play that we do potentially a touchdown. I feel that number one, we need to spend some time anchoring ourselves in reality. And there's a particular thing that I do that I found to be very successful with people that I work with. And that's in the morning when you have a first awareness of a new day. We're kind of in a state of twilight. And this is where we're going from sleep, which is a delta brainwave, where we ascend up to a theta brainwave that's like a dreamlike state. In that dreamlike state, when you have a first awareness of a new day, if you just pause and sit there and you kind of look what's in your inbox about what you need to be doing that day in relationship to a previous problem, then you may find your answer sitting in that inbox, because that's that unique period of time where that can happen. But humans aren't likely to do that because they think, well, if I'm laying in bed looking within myself, then somebody else is getting the advantage where I should actually be preparing to make sure I can run at the front of the pack, which isn't true at all. Because if you don't expose yourself to solutions that are gifted to you while you're sleeping, your brain is collating the previous day and it's finding solutions to the problems, then you're missing an opportunity to compress your time and conserve your energy from moment zero. And again, that's counterintuitive, but as far as I know, many of the things that people do, they're fear-based survival responses to the presumption that if they don't do this, they're going to get left behind. And that's not a reason to take action on anything. We kind of have to look at the evidence as to what is going to work to set us up for really success. I think some of the other things that I think that are really important during the day is that one of the last things that we should do before we start to engage people, places, and things is that we need to ask ourselves how we're going to show up for other people. Because, what I know from my daughter is that she was exposed to the most. We adopted her at the age of 10 from Colombia when I was 58. People thought I was crazy, but, my daughter did not ask to be, since the age of 4, repeatedly sexually abused or beat up. She didn't ask for that, and she has some challenges as relates to that. But here's what I want to say here is that never discount the value of how you show up in any word that you say, because you never know who's watching or who's listening. And my daughter hung on my every word. That was her lifeline to her bigger future. And I knew that whatever my challenges were, that was not her problem. And my job was to show up on her behalf and give her the best that I could possibly give her to help her find a way beyond that which she didn't ask for. And I feel like we need to show up and be of service to everyone that we interact with, because you don't know what you're going to be saying to who by the words that you say or your presence of being. And let's not decide what that is in advance. Let's just decide to show up from the highest value that we have to contribute to others. And then I always look at a picture that's on my desk. Like, why am I doing this? There's a picture of my wife who's been faithfully with me for 37 years. I also do it because of my daughter, who didn't speak English and we didn't speak Spanish when we adopted her. And she graduated from high school where nobody in her family graduated from elementary school. This is a victory over someone that was exposed to every human cruelty that you can imagine. So it was faithfully showing up and remembering, why am I doing this? And then I have this silhouette of a crowd. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this on behalf of my clients, on other people, because I want to share with them what I know. I'm 70 right now, so there's nothing that I haven't seen. I've seen it all. And I want to make sure that everybody on this planet has an opportunity to be their own full potential player, to live a life of value, purpose, and meaning and contribution. And so I think those are the assets in part that we need to be mindful of, because when we come from that space, we kind of feel like we earn our dinner. We kind of feel like we earn our sleep, because we've really done something of high value to other people that has a ripple effect that we shouldn't decide what the impact of that is. And those are some of the things among the many that I think are extraordinarily valuable for us to do.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow. And I had the privilege of, talking to Dr. Spencer about his daughter's journey. And boy, you want to talk about something that is absolutely inspirational. It's really that story. And so thank you for sharing a bit of that.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to San Diego, and we're going to Bob Schultz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good morning, and thanks, Scott and Jeff, for this session. Jeff, you brought up the issue of blowing up
yes.
times, and
yes.
and I'd like to have you explore that a little bit more. I mean, all of us know what that is physically a little bit when you've overtrained and whatnot, but what about the mental, psychological aspects of it, and also the idea of restraint, which you brought up, which I think is great. How has your view of that changed? I mean, we're about the same age, and my view of restraint is different now than it was when I was a young man of 40.
Yeah, well, scar tissue changes how we view things, of course.
Yeah. So how has your vision of restraint changed, and how do you translate some of that to a young, great athlete in their 20s or 30s who don't even understand the concept?
Well, I think you have to introduce that as early as possible, really in your early teens, ideally, because when you know everything when you're 16, to 35, there's generally no conversation because people aren't going to listen no matter what you do. They just think, because they can think it, that it's real. And that's one of the biggest risks I see in the early 30s, is that people have a little bit of wind at their back and they just think that they're infallible. So they go out and they do some things that are reckless, but they don't know that because they don't have any reference points to measure the risks against. So they end up either, again, catastrophic relationship failure, health event, or financial ruin, and in my opinion, all those are preventable. There just needs to be an early conversation. So like I told my daughter, I said, her name is Ken, K-I-N. I said, Ken, I need to talk to you for a second here. And you're not going to understand what I'm saying, but I kind of want to set the stage for later. And I'm not giving you a lecture. I'm not telling you what to do. And so I can tell her anything to set the stage about some of the risks that she will encounter in the future. And I talk to her about what some of the warning signs of that are. So when those show up, she comes to me and she says, Dad, some of the things that we talked about are now here. I said, great, you've come for the right reason. Let's now talk about what that means. And you look at Lance and you look at Tiger, two people that I've worked with. They both have black eyes for different reasons. And a lot of those, I bet there was never a conversation about some of the risks that we will be faced with later until we get there. And I just feel like there has to be an early conversation. And unfortunately, most people, once the white flag goes up, because they now find themselves in the mental hospital in a certain metaphorical sense, because they've exhausted themselves and they've tried to do it their way, and they realize that it doesn't work. Now they're open to sound counsel. And I do feel like restraint is the hardest thing to do ever, but it's also simultaneously the most important. And I care enough about the people that I work with to tell them the truth, not in a lecture sense, but we're calling out the context of what this means with where we are against our ambitions. We talk about what the fallacy is against the reality. And then we chart a path forward to make sure that we have the best opportunity to avoid the preventable problems and seize the probable opportunities that are around the corner. And I'm fastidious about this, that nobody gets any slack for this. And, because of my age and because of where I've been, I could peek around the corner and see what's coming. And so I really feel that we need to be an advocate for other people's vulnerability, because our human nature is not necessarily our friend. It prompts us to do things that may seem right, but they end up not being right. I think all of us have had a boyfriend or a girlfriend where we thought it was the best thing ever. And then 1 week later, we were saying to ourselves, man, what was I thinking? Well, that's a good question. What was I thinking? And why was I thinking that? And so we can extrapolate that to our life taken as a whole. And that's the reason why I think we need sound counsel in our corner. Like, look, how did Rocky become Rocky? He had the raw substrate, but he had Mickey in his corner. He had the old guy. Mickey look, anybody that doesn't walk with a limp or have a missing ear or, their nose on the side of their face or missing discolored teeth, I don't trust them, because they haven't been in the game enough to know what they're talking about. And so Rocky did it because he had Mickey, who in real time was watching him in the ring while he was slugging it out like we all do day in and day out. And Mickey saw what had to go right, and he relayed to Rocky what he needed to do to win the round to become the perennial champion of the world. And I do feel like we have three types of advisors. You have your coaches, like Bono had a voice coach. He needs a voice coach. But the voice coach doesn't know anything about the rest of his life. It's more likely that what's happening in the rest of his life is going to mess with his voice rather than the voice coach's recommendation. And mentors are important as well. They're essential. But again, they maybe see half your life, but what about the other half? So who's there like watching everything that you're doing in real time, like Mickey was doing? There needs to be this sagely individual that has enough life experience to be able to share with you the reality of what you're thinking. And that's what the champions all have that I was alluding to when I was answering Scott's question. They know it to be true because there's a body of evidence that tells us that it's true. And the more that you can avoid the preventable problems, the better it's going to be. So that would be the thing that I would say. Like, who's your corner man? Who are you talking to that is showing you what's coming that you don't know about? Because none of us can outrun our blind spots. Blind spots are expensive, So that's the way that I would answer that, Bob. It's never too early to have the conversation.
Great advice. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great question. Thank you.
So even New York Yankees sometimes need pinch hitters. So Dana Cavalier, Coach Cavalier, as you guys know, is a member of the Talent Champions Council and is a great friend of everybody in the TCC. And I know that he had a question. Unfortunately, he had a last minute obligation that took him away from the call. So Kathy Leckie is going to pinch hit for him.
Oh, perfect.
Because she's got Dana's question. So Kathy, you're up for Mr. Cavalier.
All right. He asked, he said he'd like to know some of the emotional stressors or stressors in general that you have to deal with and what you use to overcome them on your journey on a day-to-day basis.
Well, obviously, the game I play, there are circumstances that demand an immediate strategy that needs to be implemented. And the higher you go on the food chain, sometimes the more difficult the complexity because of the benefit to risk consequences. And I do know that if you can't answer things quickly and accurately, well, then there's no reason for you to be there first and foremost. So the kind of formula that I use and I use with my clients, and this is really important, so please listen up on this. I feel that when you're faced with something of significance, of significance is the best way to say that. The first question that you want to ask yourself is, what do I think about this? I wouldn't go to the experts right off. I think that, what do I think about this? We need to give ourselves a chance to answer that question within the privacy of our own conversation between our head and our heart and our soul and every ounce of our experience, because I do believe that people do have a lot greater capacity to answer their own questions if they take a moment to pause and contemplate it. I feel that that's the first place to start. Then the second question is, like, who am I? Give you an example. So one of my clients who owns a financial business, he had a $200 million client that he'd been looking to have a conversation with, that now called him to be an advisor to him about some things. And he started to lock up. He'd been waiting to talk with this person for several years, and he started to lock up. And I said, well, ask yourself, what do you think about this? And so he thought about what the request was, and he realized when he thought about it, rather than believe the mythology of being startled and what am I going to say, he looked at what he thought about it, and he realized, you know what? I know exactly how to solve this person's problem. Even though this guy maybe is here in notoriety, I'm here in terms of notoriety, but I'm here in terms of providing him with what he needs to know, because he asked the question. Then the second one, who am I? He said, well, he's lucky to be in my presence because I have the answer to his solution. I have the solution to his question. And so all of a sudden, the confidence was there based upon the reality of what it was. Otherwise, he could talk himself out of it. I'm not ready for this. I just need another week. No, you don't. You should be able to step up and do it now if you have that evidence. And then the question is, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? So again, I think those 4 questions, if we give ourselves a chance to ask those questions, will inform us of our state of readiness. And if we need counsel to fill in the gaps, well, then we can go to counsel at that time. But let's take a look at what we think about it first, because eventually we all have to stand on our own 2 feet at some point. And this is a way of putting us at a point of neutrality, to not let our fear talk us into things that discredit who we really are. And that's the way that I handle these situations. And I always stay in my lane. For example, if I hear a mechanic to a race car driver giving the race car driver advice on nutrition, then he's automatically ruined his credibility and his mechanical ability because he's gotten out of his lane. So I think it's really important that we stay in our lane and we're really clear about what that is. And then you become fearless about the recommendations if you know it's within your lane.
Phenomenal advice. We're going to stay with our good buddy in California, Chad. You're up.
Yeah, thanks, Sir Scott. Dr. Spencer, I think, I've been fortunate enough to obviously spend time at your house for a weekend retreat and have many conversations around the goal achievement roadmap, the life lens progression, and the perfect day. So I won't get too in depth in those, but I'd say one of the takeaways, of the many takeaways, looking at your screen and talk about the champion's blueprint. And one thing that jumped out to me is your definition or how you articulate a champion. In this instance, for me, I think of a champion as someone that wins, someone that's on top of the podium at the end of an event or an activity. However, the way you positioned it is a champion is someone who can manifest their gifts.
Correct.
Is able to give me to step back and like, wow, let me take a better optic of what are my gifts and how can I manifest those to transition as a champion. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that might resonate with this group in defining a quote unquote champion.
Yeah, I just think that what levels the playing field here is that if we manifest our gifts, that's the highest expression of a champion. Because look, there's 7 billion people on this planet right now. And there's only one of you. There is no other you in all of creation that uniquely qualifies us to do some extraordinary things if we connect with those talents and we cultivate those talents to be able to express and manifest our contribution to humanity. And what I want to say here is that how we best contribute to humanity, where the distance between or the degrees of separation is almost like non-existent now. When people look at their aspirations and their contribution and their impacts, in today's vernacular, the comment like, well, how are you going to impact 1 billion people? I say, I don't think that's the right question. In my opinion, the right question is that, are you building your life based upon your assets that allow you to align mind, body, and soul with what your gifts are? And the truth is that you don't know who's being impacted by what. I mean, you don't know that. Can we just not decide that? Can we just sort of put that aside for a while and really look at what we're best at and what our sweet spot is? And can we embrace that? And can we be okay with that as being enough? I think we need to get back to that, because if you want to live a life of tranquility of being, it's about alignment with self as we know ourselves to be. It's not an apology tour about what we think that we should be to impact people, because you don't know. I think that's one of the greatest limitations to people living a life of value and being okay with life as it is. There's this idea that it has to be 1 billion people or it has to be this number. It doesn't. It's you, the person that shows up. We got to live with ourselves. Where is that place where we show up as a person that wants to be emulated by others because of our presence of being? And I do know that when we look at our gifts and our talents and we build a life based on that, then it's a game changer, because our aspirations are just completely different. I'm just going to suggest that we take a pause on that, because look, when I was working in a bike shop, I was the world's worst mechanic when I was a kid. This guy came in, he was wearing a t-shirt that said USA Olympic team on it. He doesn't even remember wearing that t-shirt. Doesn't even remember it. But I saw it as a kid. I wanted that t-shirt worse than anything, because he wore it, because I knew to get that, you had to become an Olympian. I went home that day and I got a box of crayons. Those boxes of crayons that have those 3 levels of crayons, and it's got all the metallics, the platinum, the pewter, the gold, the tin. I mean, I thought that was like beyond magical. So I took that and I took a thick piece of paper and I drew the t-shirt. And I made my plan how I was going to become an Olympian. I was going to be brave. I was going to work hard, and I was never going to make an excuse. That was my plan. I still have that plan today. And I looked at that every day. That was my logo, the t-shirt. I looked at that every day for 10 years. 10 years later, I was an Olympian. The guy doesn't even remember wearing the t-shirt. So I think it's really important that we not decide the impact that we have as a human, but we step into every moment as an opportunity to show up and radiate and embody that which we know to be true for ourselves. And we give people permission by doing that to engage and connect with that which is really them, rather than to feel less than because they don't have the capacity to impact like the experts and as the media and other sources tell that it needs to be of significance. Your significance should never be underestimated at any point in time, because you just don't know. It's a matter of showing up with confidence. Actually, it's a matter of 5 things. Number 1 is that, do we have a champion's mind? I didn't say a mindset that's rigid. I said a champion's mind. Can we think and act like a manifestor of gifts and honor that? Number 2, can we control a day? Fundamental unit of life. If we can't control a day, we can't control our life. We can't manifest our potential if we can't control a day. Number 3, do we know how to win? Do you actually understand the skill of winning? Do you know how to do that? Number 3, can you peek around the corner and know what's coming so that the blind side doesn't take you out of the game? And number 5 is, can you zone pace? Can you go at the peak efficiency rate of progress to get to the winner's circle most efficiently without blowing yourself up? If you can do those 5 things, then the sky's the limit to a life of tranquility of being, because you know you're giving your best, because you've honored your talent and you're showcasing to other people what it takes to get to the winner's circle. So let me say one other thing here, if I may. I'm kind of on a rampage, as you could tell here, so I just got to sort of burn myself out. I also want to say, does winning matter? Yeah, I think it does, because every time we succeed, that's how we say thank you to our benefactors, our friends, our family, the opportunity. But most importantly, why winning matters is because it showcases to others what's possible in a world that can't descend fast enough into mediocrity. And I don't believe we're here. If you look at the list in the hierarchy of instincts that we're born with, the one that's the most obscure is seeking. It's like one of our primal instincts is to seek, and we seek to create, and we seek to be able to plant our flag in the moon. And if we can do that within the boundaries of what our gifts are, with integrity and commitment, then we have lived a life fulfilled. And that's what I'm dedicated to helping my clients achieve. It's about a fulfilled life based on the stuff that delivers on the promise of a life of contribution and a life of significance and value.
Onward and upward. Thank you, my friend.
The value that we are getting today is unbelievable. I cannot wait to listen to the recording again in the master class or in the Knowledge Center. I love the apology tour. That was phenomenal. So we've got time for 2 more questions. We're going to go to Brian in Washington, and then Kathy in Florida is going to wrap it up for us. So Brian, you're up.
Great. Thank you, Scott. So Jeff, great to meet you. Like, one thing,
Hi,
I don't
Brian.
know if other coaches have struggled with this, but I have this perennial struggle with helping myself as much as I help others. And so how do we as coaches learn to coach ourselves as effectively as we love coaching other people? Because like the hairs in the back of my neck stand up when I help someone else achieve something meaningful in their life, but it is not the same for me, right? Do I need to Jedi mind trick myself into pretending I'm someone else so that I can be as effective for myself as I am for others? Or do I look for that corner man you're talking about? Or do I get a coach myself? Like, what guidance do you have there?
Well, I know none of us can outrun our blind spots. So I'm going to suggest, and there are no exemptions from a coach. So I would suggest that you find a corner man to help you with the nuances, to be able to craft your path forward would be my suggestion. And the other thing that I wanted to say, about this is that we don't need to be the perfect example of the expert to be the right person to say the right thing to the person at that moment in time that they need to hear it. One of my friends, his wife was an expert in digestive tract health, etc. The only problem is that she couldn't cure herself of the problems that she had, and she felt that she was an imposter because she couldn't heal herself. And to me, that's complete mythology. That's a complete disconnect. But our mind sometimes is not our friend. It makes us think things that aren't real. And so, look, we don't have to be perfection. We don't. We just have to be the person that has the right information to be able to convey to others at the right time that they need to hear, that's transformative for them. And as long as we're in a process of evolution ourselves, we'll never get to that arrival destination, because you never get there in a lifetime, is one of the conclusions I know to be true. And when we learn to become gentle with ourselves and good stewards of our humanness, and we don't put expectations on ourselves that aren't real, then how we show up is different. And people hear us in a very different way. We don't need to be something that we're not. We just need to be clear about what we do know to be true. And if we come from that place to inform people without trying to make a point or to be something that we're really not, then we're heard in an entirely different way. And what I do know is that there's always enough energy when we do things on behalf of other people. Where the energy consumption gets a little bit too high is when everything is induced by self-interest, and when we're motivated by fear of lack or fear of loss or fear of getting left behind. That's where the energy expenditure becomes extraordinarily exorbitant, almost to the point where it's unsustainable. And so that's how I would answer that, Brian. I hope that helps.
It does.
You're welcome.
Kathy, you're taking us home.
All right, great. Hi, Doc. Thanks
Hi,
so
Kathy.
much thanks so much for being here today,
Welcome.
and hi to everybody else on the call. So here's my question. Is fear a part of becoming excellent? And yes or no, and please discuss either way.
Yeah. So, I was asked to come in and help an athlete who was favored to win the gold medal in the Olympics, and 2.5 weeks before the Olympic final, he was starting to mentally unravel. So I thought to myself, okay, so, here you are 2.5 weeks before the Olympic final, you got the best of everything, coaches, massage, equipment, but yet you're mentally unraveling. I mean, where was the conversation about the possibility of this? Why is this happening now? Yet I knew, because it happens all the time. But the point I wanted to make about fear is that, what I was telling the athlete, I said, I know you feel a lot of fear right now. You're terrified because you've got the weight of your country on your shoulders to win the gold medal, because you've been reading the headlines for the last year. Rutherford will bring it home for the UK, and you're currently leading the world championship, but now you're starting to mentally unravel. That's not a good such situation here. But I said, what you need to know about fear is, first off, is that fear is a sign of biologic readiness. When you're going to do something that's extraordinary that you haven't done before, that's how you get from here to here. It's not imposter syndrome. That's garbage. The way you get from where you are to where you want to get to, you have to calculate it. Then you need to take action on it when you need to take action on it. And so what I told him is that dilated pupils, sweaty palms, increased respiratory rate, those are all signs of biologic readiness, that you're ready to enact and take action on something that needs to be there. It's absolutely essential. And I said, look, the idea of being fear-free, the reality of this is that people that think that they're living a fear-free life, these people have a low-grade anxiety that haunts them. And the reason why it haunts them is that what they're doing, they're not living a fear-free life. They're living a life too much in the safe zone, so they don't know what their edges are. And if you don't know what your edges are, then you're never going to take a risk. You don't know how to prepare for the future. So this idea of fear is, in my view, a bit disassociated with reality. It is our friend. Everybody has it. I mean, Bono's like a lunatic before he goes on stage, but he knows how to control that. He knows what to do when he goes on stage. Same way with Lance. He told me, God, I had this voice inside my head telling me I was going to have a bad stage today. There are no free passes or exemptions from the situation. And that's where readiness comes into it. So when we know we're prepared because we've gone through the steps that confirm to us that we're capable of doing it without actually doing it live ammo, then all we need to do is execute our preparation and have trust in that. And if we have sweaty palms, that's just performance anxiety. It's not that we can't do it. So it's really interpreting the experience is one of the things that I do really well for my clients. I explain to them what all this means. And so as we demystify the experience that we're living, and we don't talk ourselves out of it by misconstruing stuff, then that's how we start to gain ascendancy and confidence in our ability to read terrain and take the right action when it needs to be initiated. So I hope that kind of gives an insight into the idea that you don't need to be fear-free. If you
It
are,
does. Thank you.
you're playing life way too much in the safe zone. That's all that means.
I think Brian just put in the chat the word wisdom, and that's a great way to sum things up. The amount of wisdom that we just received in an hour is unbelievable. And I would say every